Hello, my friends, and welcome to Immersive History. The date that would become synonymous with bad luck had not yet earned its dark reputation, but October 13th, 1307, would change that forever. Dawn breaks over France to reveal a kingdom transformed overnight. Empty Templar commanderies, their gates thrown open, their treasuries seized, their knights dragged away in chains. King Philip IV's trap has been sprung with devastating efficiency. Across the kingdom, 2 centuries of accumulated wealth, gold, silver, land and power, falls into royal hands. Or does it? The greatest treasure hunt in medieval history began not with maps marked with X's, but with desperate men carrying saddlebags full of secrets through the forests of northern France. This is not a story of pirates and buried chests, but of knights and monks who refused to let everything they had built simply vanish into a king's treasury. It is a tale of the most sophisticated financial network of the medieval world attempting to survive its own destruction, and of treasures that may have travelled farther than anyone could have imagined. You will live through the final desperate months of the Knights Templar, through the eyes of a man tasked with the most dangerous mission of his life, to save what could be saved when all seemed lost. Your journey from the forests of France to the cold shores of Scotland, and perhaps beyond, will reveal not just where the treasure might have gone, but why these men risked everything to move it. But before that, I'd appreciate it if you gave this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these historical explorations possible. Now let's leave the modern world behind and step into the pre-dawn darkness of a French forest, just 30 miles north of Paris. Your name is Brother Guillaume de Montclair, and you are about to become one of the most wanted men in Europe. Unlike your brother knights, you are not in a French prison cell on this Black Friday, October 13th, 1307. Instead, you crouch in the shadows between ancient oak trees, your heart pounding as you listen to the distant sounds of royal sergeants hunting for stragglers who escaped the Great Roundup. In your saddlebags are documents that could destroy kings, and strapped to your horse are coffers containing a fortune in gold and precious relics that took 2 centuries to accumulate. You are a veteran of 15 years in the Order. Your face bears the scars of campaigns in the Holy Land and Cyprus, where you fought during the final, desperate defence of Acre in 1291. Your hands are calloused from years of sword work and rope hauling aboard Templar galleys. You speak fluent Arabic, Greek, and the Norman French of the Crusader states. These skills, combined with your proven loyalty and discretion, made you the perfect choice for this mission. The horse beneath you is a destrier named Thunder, a massive black warhorse that has carried you through a dozen battles. His breath steams in the cold October air as he snorts nervously, sensing your tension. Your armour is not the white surcoat with red cross that marked you as a Templar. That would be suicide now. Instead, you wear the plain brown robes of a Franciscan friar, a disguise that has already saved your life twice on this journey. You are part of a plan that was set in motion weeks before the arrests. The Templar leadership was not blind to the growing threat from King Philip IV. They had watched the king debase his currency and squeeze every source of revenue he could find. They knew that the Order's vast wealth made them an irresistible target, especially after their refusal to merge with the Hospitallers, a merger that would have put all their assets under papal control. The Order, facing such peril, had risen from humble beginnings 2 centuries earlier. In 1118, 9 French knights, led by Hugues de Payens, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with an unprecedented proposal to combine monastic vows with military service, protecting Christian pilgrims on the dangerous roads to the Holy Land. From their quarters in Solomon's Temple ruins, these poor fellow soldiers of Christ grew into Europe's most powerful military and financial institution. Their innovative banking system revolutionizing medieval commerce, while their warrior monks became legendary from the deserts of Outremer to the courts of kings. But success bred enemies, and none more dangerous than Philip IV of France. The king, who inherited a bankrupt kingdom in 1285, had watched the Templars' wealth with growing envy and desperation. Their treasuries held more gold than his own, their international network defied royal control, and their papal privileges exempted them from taxation. When Philip moved the papacy to Avignon under French control, and the Templars refused his demands to merge with the Hospitallers, their fate was sealed. What followed was not a spontaneous religious persecution, but a carefully orchestrated financial conquest disguised as a crusade against heresy. The first warning had come from a former Templar, who had been expelled from the order for misconduct. In his bitterness, he had approached the king with wild accusations of heresy and blasphemy. Most of the leadership dismissed these charges as the ravings of a vengeful apostate. But Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, was not so certain. He had lived through the fall of Acre, had seen how quickly the impossible could become reality. He ordered a small group of trusted knights to begin what he euphemistically called the preservation protocols. In the deepest secrecy, a select group of knights were chosen for a mission that would be spoken of only in whispers, to move the most precious and portable assets of the order to safety. You were chosen not because you were the highest ranking, but because you possessed the skills needed for such a dangerous undertaking. You spoke multiple languages. You knew the sea routes from your years coordinating supply runs to Cyprus. You had connections with ship captains and merchants who asked no questions. Most importantly, you were expendable enough that your absence from Paris would not be immediately noticed, but trusted enough to be given guardianship of incalculable wealth. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but terrifying in its implications. While the bulk of the order's wealth remained in France, the lands and buildings that could not be moved, the most precious and portable treasures, would be evacuated. These included not just gold and silver, but something potentially more valuable: the order's archives. 200 years of financial records, correspondence with popes and kings, details of loans and debts, and most dangerously, documentation of the political secrets the Templars had accumulated through their role as Europe's bankers. You remember the night when the Order's master archivist explained the true scope of what you would be carrying. In a candle-lit chamber beneath the Paris Temple, surrounded by towering wooden shelves filled with scrolls and bound volumes, he had spread before you documents that represented the accumulated intelligence of 2 centuries. The materials contained evidence of papal illegitimacy that could challenge the authority of 3 successive pontiffs, detailed records of financial arrangements that had influenced imperial elections while being disguised as charitable donations, and correspondence that documented how European monarchs had manipulated Templar loans to fund military campaigns before repudiating their debts through legal technicalities. The weight of such knowledge was crushing. These were not merely financial records, but the secret history of medieval Europe. Every major political development of the past century had involved Templar money, Templar intelligence, or Templar mediation. Kings had been made and unmade with gold from Templar treasuries. Wars had been funded, territories purchased, rebellions financed. All with the understanding that the Templars maintained detailed records of every transaction. "Why did we keep such detailed accounts?" you had asked the master archivist. His smile was grim. "Because knowledge is the ultimate currency. A king who owes you gold can repudiate the debt. A king whose secrets you know will always find ways to repay you." Now, as you flee through the French countryside, you understand why these documents are more dangerous than any sword and why they must be preserved at all costs. Your particular cargo represents years of careful selection and enormous risk. In the lead-lined chest strapped behind your saddle are 43 pounds of pure gold, shaped into ingots, bearing the Templar seal. Each ingot is worth enough to buy a small castle, but their true value lies in their portability and universal acceptance. Gold speaks the same language in every kingdom, every port, every market from London to Constantinople. But the gold, precious as it is, represents only a fraction of your cargo's worth. Wrapped in layers of oiled leather and silk are silver reliquaries containing what the Order believes to be fragments of the true cross, acquired during the capture of Jerusalem in 1099. These splinters of wood, no larger than a child's finger, have been authenticated by 3 different popes and have been the focal point of pilgrimages that generated thousands of pounds in donations. There is also a thorn, allegedly from Christ's crown, set in a crystal vial that was gifted to the Order by Emperor Baldwin IV of Jerusalem. Most precious of all is a piece of linen, barely the size of a man's palm, that the Order's scholars believe came from the Holy Shroud itself. These relics are beyond monetary value. Pilgrims have travelled thousands of miles just to glimpse them, and their veneration has funded Templar operations for decades. Kings have begged for the privilege of housing them temporarily in their castle chapels. Pope Innocent IV once offered to trade territorial concessions in the Papal States for the right to display them in Rome during Easter week. Now they travel with you, wrapped in common cloth, reduced to cargo in your desperate flight. Your mission was to take this treasure north, to the Kingdom of Scotland. Scotland was at war with England, ruled by Robert the Bruce, who had been excommunicated by the Pope for his rebellion. This made Scotland a perfect sanctuary. It was beyond the reach of both the French king and papal authority. The Templars had significant holdings in Scotland, and there were indications that King Robert might be sympathetic to knights, who, like him, had been declared enemies of the established order. But as you ride through the French countryside in those dark October days, you realise that the plan may have been discovered. The arrests were too swift, too coordinated. Every Templar commandery in France was hit simultaneously, from the Grand Preceptory in Paris to tiny rural holdings you thought no one even remembered. This level of organisation suggested that King Philip's agents had been watching the Order for months, possibly years. The possibility haunts you that your escape might have been anticipated, that royal agents might be tracking you, even now. The evidence of surveillance is everywhere. At the village of Meaux, where you had planned to rest, you find royal sergeants already posted at the inn. Most disturbing of all, at a river crossing near Amiens, you encounter a patrol of royal guards, who seem to be searching specifically for a rider matching your description. Only Thunder's speed and your knowledge of the local terrain allow you to escape. The first stage of your journey takes you through a network of safe houses that reveals the true extent of Templar influence in medieval France. At each stop along your perilous route, the network of Templar sympathisers reveals itself in ways both heartening and terrifying. These are not grand nobles or wealthy merchants, but ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the Order's work, farmers whose lands had been improved by Templar agricultural innovations, craftsmen who had learned their trades in Templar workshops, widows whose husbands had died fighting alongside Templar knights in the Holy Land. The network operates through a system of signs and codes that had evolved over generations. A particular way of tying a horse's reins signals that the rider is under protection. A wooden cross placed at a specific angle beside a farmhouse door indicates a safe haven. Most cleverly, messages are passed through the network of parish priests, many of whom had been educated in Templar schools and retained loyalty to their former teachers. But the network has its limits and dangers. At the village of Crépy-en-Valois, you arrive to find that your planned contact, a miller, has been arrested on suspicion of harbouring fugitives. His mill stands abandoned, its great wheels silent, and neighbours whisper that royal sergeants found Templar coins in his flour sacks. Whether he was betrayed by an informant or simply the victim of bad luck, his fate serves as a stark reminder of the risks faced by anyone who helps you. Your journey to the coast becomes increasingly dangerous as royal patrols intensify their search. Near the forest of Crécy, you encounter evidence of a recent manhunt, trampled ground where cavalry have passed, abandoned campsites still smouldering, and most ominously, a Templar cross carved into a tree trunk with the word traitor burned below it. Someone has been caught, but whether they escaped or were captured remains unknown. At the village of Senlis, your Templar training proves most valuable in an unexpected way. You arrive to find the population in panic over an outbreak of the bloody flux that has already claimed a dozen lives. The local priest, recognizing your Franciscan robes, begs for your assistance. Years of experience in Templar infirmaries, where you learned Arabic medical techniques acquired during the Crusades, enable you to diagnose the contaminated well that is spreading the disease. Working through the night, you apply methods learned from Muslim physicians in Outremer, boiling water before consumption, isolating the sick, and preparing herbal remedies using knowledge preserved in Templar medical manuscripts. Your success in halting the epidemic not only saves lives, but provides perfect cover for your mission. Who would suspect a fleeing Templar of stopping to serve as a village physician? The grateful villagers provide you with fresh supplies and a guide to the next safe house, never knowing they have aided one of the most wanted men in France. At the monastery of Saint-Denis, you encounter a different challenge that reveals the diplomatic complexities of your order's position. The abbot had been a childhood friend of Jacques de Molay before taking religious vows. His loyalties are divided between his friendship with your Grand Master and his obligations to papal authority. In a tense midnight conversation in the monastery's scriptorium, surrounded by illuminated manuscripts that represent centuries of Christian learning, he reveals the true scope of the political maneuvering surrounding the persecution. Philip's agents approached me months ago, he confesses, his face haggard with worry. They offered our monastery protection from taxation and increased royal patronage in exchange for information about Templar movements through our region. I refused, but how many others have accepted such bargains? Your order's network of allies is being systematically compromised through a combination of threats and inducements that few can resist. The abbot's revelation explains not just the efficiency of the arrests, but the broader campaign to isolate the Templars from their traditional sources of support. Yet he also provides crucial intelligence. A Templar convoy carrying a group of craftsmen and their families had passed through 3 days earlier, bound for the coast. Their destination matches your own, suggesting that the evacuation plan involves coordination between multiple groups rather than isolated individual flights. Near Beauvais, you witness firsthand how Templar agricultural innovations had transformed the French countryside, and why their loss represents more than just financial catastrophe. The fields you pass show clear evidence of Templar influence. The 3-field rotation system that increased crop yields, the windmills whose design had been perfected in Templar workshops, the drainage channels that had reclaimed marshy ground for cultivation. Local farmers speak bitterly of royal agents, seizing not just Templar lands, but the technical knowledge that made them productive. They took our master miller, explains an old farmer whose weathered hands show decades of hard labour. He knew the secrets of the Templar grain storage methods that kept our harvests fresh through winter. Now the grain rots in royal granaries because the king's men don't understand what they've stolen. The conversation reveals how Templar expertise extended far beyond banking and warfare into the practical technologies that sustained medieval civilization. Your horse trade near Abbeville becomes a moment that crystallizes the profound changes overtaking your world. Thunder, your massive destrier, has been your companion for 7 years, but recognition is now a death sentence. Thunder's appearance marks you as clearly as wearing the Templar cross itself. Royal agents have surely received descriptions of fleeing knights and their mounts, and Thunder's war-trained gait is unmistakable to anyone with military experience. The decision to trade him is strategically necessary, but emotionally devastating. The fishing village of Topple reeks of salt and rotting fish, but it also represents the culmination of centuries of maritime development that made such coastal communities crucial to medieval commerce. The harbour is full of small boats designed for coastal fishing, their designs perfected over generations to handle the treacherous waters of the English Channel. But anchored beyond the bar is a larger vessel that immediately catches your attention, not just because of its size, but because of subtle design features that mark it as something more than a simple merchant ship. The Sint Barvo is a cog, a type of merchant vessel that represents the pinnacle of Northern European shipbuilding technology. Its high sides and single square sail are typical of Flemish traders, but closer examination reveals modifications that speak to its true purpose. The hull is reinforced with extra timbers that could resist both heavy seas and hostile action. The deck layout includes features that might serve military purposes, anchor points for ballistas, cleared spaces where armed men could form defensive positions, and most tellingly, a slightly raised quarterdeck that would allow officers to coordinate defensive actions during an attack. But the most remarkable feature of the Sint Barvo is its hidden compartments, designed for carrying high-value cargo that requires protection from both thieves and tax collectors. These spaces concealed within the ship's structure so skillfully that they are virtually undetectable, can hold substantial quantities of gold, silver, or documents. Their existence reflects the realities of medieval commerce, where merchants routinely dealt with customs officials who might seize valuable cargo on various pretexts, and bandits who specialised in attacking trading vessels. Peter van Bruges, the ship's captain, helps you prepare for passage. His family's trading network exemplifies the international character of medieval commerce. Their ships carry Flemish cloth to England and return with English wool. They transport French wine to Scandinavia and return with furs and amber. Helping fleeing Templars could destroy their business and endanger their lives, but refusing to honour old obligations could equally destroy their reputation for reliability. Van Brugge family history with the Templars runs deeper than simple commercial relationships. It represents 3 generations of carefully cultivated trust that had proven profitable for both sides. The crossing becomes a test of endurance that nearly claims both your life and your precious cargo, but it also provides insight into the broader European context of the Templar persecution. A late October storm, typical for the season, but unusually violent, strikes when you are halfway across the channel. The Sint Barvo, sturdy though she is, struggles against waves that tower above her masts, and winds that threaten to drive her onto the notorious Goodwin Sands. During the 12-hour battle for survival, as you and Peter's crew fight to keep the ship afloat, the captain shares information that fundamentally alters your understanding of the situation. The destruction of the Templars, he reveals, has been years in the planning, coordinated not just by King Philip, but by a network of agents that extends throughout Europe. French spies had infiltrated not just the order itself, but the entire ecosystem of merchants, ship captains, and financial intermediaries who served them. They knew everything, Peter shouts over the howling wind as you work the pumps to keep the ship from sinking. Which captains carried Templar cargo, which ports were used for sensitive shipments, which warehouses stored goods waiting for transport, which inns provided lodging for travelling knights. The simultaneity of the arrests was possible because Philip's agents had been mapping our entire network for months, possibly years. This intelligence network, Peter explains, operated through a combination of paid informants, blackmail, and the penetration of existing commercial relationships. French agents had posed as merchants, seeking to establish trading connections with Templar-affiliated businesses. They had recruited clerks and servants who had access to transportation schedules and cargo manifests. Most insidiously, they had exploited the financial difficulties of businesses that depended on Templar contracts, offering immediate payment for information about future shipments and travel plans. But Peter also offers information that provides hope along with this disturbing revelation of the persecution's scope. They missed some things, he says with a grim smile as the storm begins to subside. Ships sailing from La Rochelle in the weeks before the arrests. Vessels carrying not just treasure, but entire households. Wives, children, servants, craftsmen, all sailing under different flags, all bound for different destinations. These pre-arrest departures, Peter suggests, were not panicked flights, but elements of a coordinated evacuation plan that had been developed by Templar leaders who understood the growing danger. The ships had sailed at different times and taken different routes to avoid attracting attention, but their destinations were chosen according to a strategic plan that sought to preserve not just Templar wealth, but the entire civilization that the Order had created. Some went to Portugal, Peter continues, where King Dinis has promised protection, and where there is talk of creating new military orders under royal patronage rather than papal authority. Others sailed to Cyprus, where the Hospitallers might provide shelter despite their traditional rivalry with your order. But some, brother, sailed much further than either of those destinations. This last statement, delivered with particular emphasis, carries implications that make your heart race. If Templar evacuation ships have sailed beyond Cyprus and Portugal, where might they have gone? The Templars possessed some of the best navigational knowledge in Europe, gained through 2 centuries of operating supply lines to the eastern Mediterranean. Their archives contained maps and sailing directions that were unknown to other mariners, including information about islands and coastlines that did not appear on official charts. The possibility that some Templar ships might have attempted voyages to completely unknown destinations, perhaps following routes pioneered by Norse explorers, perhaps seeking lands that existed only in the reports of Arab geographers, adds an entirely new dimension to the evacuation effort. If successful, such expeditions would place Templar treasure and knowledge beyond the reach, not just of King Philip, but of any European power whatsoever. You land on the English coast near Dover under cover of darkness, but England presents its own unique dangers. English King Edward II has received papal orders to arrest Templars, though he seems reluctant to act with the same brutality as his French counterpart. The English Templars had been given several weeks' warning before their arrests, and many had already fled or gone into hiding. This makes the countryside dangerous, filled with both hunters and hunted. The landscape you traverse tells the story of a kingdom torn apart by war and occupation, but also of a people who have learned to survive and resist under impossible conditions. In southern and eastern England, burned villages mark the path of English armies, their destruction systematic and deliberate, designed not just to seize territory, but to break the will of the population. Crossing into northern England and southern Scotland, hastily constructed fortifications show where Scottish resistance has attempted to make stands, and hidden supply caches reveal the extent of popular support for continued rebellion against English occupation. But it is the religious dimension of the conflict that provides the most crucial context for understanding your mission and the broader implications of the Templar persecution. King Robert's excommunication by Pope Clement V was not merely a diplomatic gesture or a response to his disputed claim to the Scottish throne. It fundamentally altered the spiritual landscape of Scotland. Churches that had once looked to Rome for guidance now find themselves caught between papal authority and the practical necessity of survival in a kingdom whose ruler has been declared anathema by the Church. Many Scottish clergy have chosen to support Bruce despite the excommunication, arguing that the Pope's subjugation to French political pressure has compromised his spiritual authority and that their primary obligation is to their parishioners rather than to distant ecclesiastical bureaucrats. This religious upheaval creates opportunities for Templar refugees that would be unthinkable in France, England, or most other European kingdoms. In those lands, harbouring accused heretics would be both treason against secular authority and sacrilege against religious authority. In Scotland, where papal authority is already questioned and secular authority is locked in struggle with external enemies, providing sanctuary for persecuted Templars becomes an act of resistance against foreign domination rather than defiance of legitimate authority. The monks here don't see you as heretics, your guide explains, as you pass a religious community that continues its work despite the surrounding chaos. They see you as fellow victims of French political manipulation, brothers in suffering who share their resistance to foreign domination. When the same Pope who condemned your order also excommunicated our king for defending Scottish independence, the connection becomes impossible to ignore. The monks themselves, when you pause to water your horses and receive their blessing, speak openly about their defiance of papal authority in terms that would be shocking anywhere else in Christendom. Rome has become the captive of French ambition, declares the monastery's abbot, his weathered face reflecting decades of pastoral service in wartime conditions. We serve God and the people of Scotland, not the political calculations of foreign princes. If that makes us heretics in the eyes of distant authorities, so be it. We answer to a higher judge than earthly popes or kings. Your route north takes you through landscapes that showcase both the devastation of war and the remarkable resilience of communities that have learned to survive constant conflict. In Yorkshire, you pass through villages where English garrisons maintain nervous control over populations that remain sympathetic to Scottish independence, or at least hostile to continued English occupation. The local people have developed subtle but effective ways of communicating their loyalties and providing assistance to travellers who share their political sympathies. Near Durham, you encounter evidence of how deeply Templar agricultural and technological innovations had penetrated English rural society. A watermill bearing subtle Templar design modifications continues to operate even after its owners have fled. Its advanced gear ratios and improved grinding mechanisms representing years of engineering refinement. The miller, unaware of the mill's Templar connections, speaks enthusiastically about its superior performance compared to traditional designs. The French master who designed this mill's improvements claimed they were old Roman techniques, he explains, running his hands over the precisely cut wooden gears that increased the mill's efficiency by nearly 40%. But I've seen Roman mills, and they never achieved precision like this. This knowledge came from somewhere else, somewhere that understood water flow and mechanical advantage better than the ancients ever did. Your examination of the mill reveals that it incorporates engineering principles developed in Templar workshops across Europe, refined through decades of practical experience and systematic experimentation. The improvements are subtle but significant. Modifications to the water wheel's angle that increase power transfer, gear ratios calculated to minimize friction and wear. Even the stone composition of the grinding surfaces represents specialized knowledge that had been accumulated through systematic testing and refinement. Approaching the Scottish border, the evidence of recent warfare becomes more intensive, and the political complexities of the region more apparent. Burned castles mark the locations of English strongholds that have been captured and systematically destroyed by Scottish forces, their walls pulled down and their keeps reduced to rubble to prevent their reoccupation. The destruction is methodical and complete, designed not just to eliminate military threats, but to send a clear message about the futility of English attempts to maintain permanent control over Scottish territory. Abandoned siege works show where attempts to retake these positions have failed, their earthworks and wooden platforms now overgrown with weeds and serving as shelter for wildlife rather than military engineers. The scale of these fortifications reveals the massive resources that both sides have invested in this border warfare, but their abandonment also demonstrates the ultimate futility of attempting to hold fixed positions in a landscape where popular sentiment favours the defenders. These communication systems represent generations of resistance experience distilled into practical techniques for survival under occupation. A particular way of tying thatch on roof edges signals Scottish sympathy to those who know how to read the signs. Specific arrangements of farm tools in dooryard areas indicate safe houses for travellers fleeing English authority. Even the positioning of livestock in fields can convey information about patrol schedules and the locations of English surveillance posts. Most significantly, you begin to encounter Scottish patrols, small groups of armed men who challenge your passage but treat you with respect when your guide provides the proper credentials and explains your mission. These Scottish soldiers represent a different military tradition from what you are accustomed to seeing in French or English armies. They lack the heavy armour and formal training of continental knights, but they possess an intimate knowledge of the terrain and a tactical flexibility that has proven devastatingly effective against conventional military forces. Several of the men you encounter have clearly served under former Templar commanders who joined Scottish forces after fleeing the persecution in their homelands. They speak knowledgeably about siege techniques, battlefield coordination, and logistical planning that reveal the influence of military innovations originally developed in the Crusader states and adapted to Scottish conditions. "The Bruce learns from everyone," explains a Scottish captain who controls the checkpoint where you finally cross into Scotland proper. English tactics when they prove effective, French innovations when they can be adapted to our circumstances, and especially the techniques that your Templar brothers brought from their service in the Holy Land. He doesn't care about traditional methods or established precedents. He cares about what works against the enemies we actually face. This pragmatic approach to military knowledge explains why Templar refugees have been so readily welcomed in Scotland and why their contributions have been so quickly integrated into Scottish military practice. Robert the Bruce and his commanders are less interested in the political and religious controversies surrounding the order than they are in the practical military advantages that former Templars can provide. The moment when you finally cross into Scotland proper is marked not by any formal boundary or official ceremony, but by a subtle change in the behaviour of the people you encounter and the general atmosphere of the territory you enter. Scottish peasants, while still cautious about approaching armed strangers, do not show the cowering fear that characterises their English counterparts. Scottish clergy speak openly about their support for King Robert and their defiance of papal authority, discussing political matters with a freedom that would be unthinkable in occupied territories. Most significantly, you begin to encounter other Templar refugees, knights, sergeants, and craftsmen who have made the same journey you are completing, all heading toward the same uncertain sanctuary that awaits in the Scottish Highlands and Islands. These fellow refugees provide crucial intelligence about conditions in Scotland and about the fate of other evacuation efforts that have preceded your own arrival. A knight from the Champagne Commandery who escaped through Flanders and reached Scotland by ship from Bruges describes his experiences in ways that both reassure and alarm you. His cargo included not just gold and documents, but also several craftsmen whose skills are already proving valuable to Scottish communities struggling to rebuild after years of warfare. These men, a master carpenter, a metal worker specialising in armour repair, and a scribe trained in multiple languages, have found ready employment and genuine welcome among Scottish patrons who value practical skills over political orthodoxy. But he also warns of the dangers that await even in Scotland, dangers that stem not from official persecution, but from the general lawlessness that characterises frontier regions during wartime. Bandits who prey on travellers carrying valuable cargo care nothing for political or religious affiliations. They are interested only in profit and will kill anyone who resists their demands. More insidiously, some Scottish nobles have shown disturbing interest in acquiring Templar assets for their own purposes, offering protection that comes with strings attached and conditions that might prove as restrictive as the persecution you are fleeing. Scotland offers sanctuary, the knight warns, but it is not paradise. The king's protection is genuine but limited. He cannot guard every refugee personally, and his authority does not extend to every corner of his realm. We must remain vigilant and continue to protect ourselves and our resources, even among those who claim to be our allies. These warnings prove prescient when your small group encounters a band of armed men who claim to represent a Scottish lord interested in hiring former Templars for undefined services. The leader speaks smoothly about opportunities for military service and generous compensation for skilled knights willing to pledge loyalty to his master. But your guide immediately recognizes the threat these men represent and skillfully extricates your group from the encounter without arousing suspicion or precipitating violence. Those weren't legitimate recruiters, he explains once you have put distance between yourselves and the armed band. They were either bandits looking for wealthy targets or agents working for nobles who want to acquire Templar assets through coercion rather than legitimate negotiation. Either way, falling into their hands would have meant the end of your mission and probably your life. You finally reach the Templar preceptory of Balantrodoch, south of Edinburgh, as dawn breaks over the Scottish lowlands, revealing a landscape that has been scarred by war but retains a beauty that speaks to the soul. The preceptory is a complex of stone buildings surrounded by a high wall with a distinctive round church at its centre that immediately identifies it as a Templar foundation. Unlike its counterparts in France, which now stand empty or have been converted to other uses, this commandery bustles with activity that would have been unthinkable anywhere else in Europe. Men wearing the white surcoats and red crosses of the Templar Order work openly in the courtyards, repairing weapons, tending horses, and conducting the daily business of a military religious community. The sight is surreal after weeks of hiding your identity and disguising your mission. Here, for the first time since fleeing France, you can openly acknowledge who you are and what you represent without fear of immediate arrest or execution. But the activity at Balantrodoch also reveals the extent to which the Scottish Templar community has been transformed by the influx of refugees from across Europe. The men working in the courtyards represent a dozen different nationalities and speak in languages that reflect the international character of the evacuation effort. French knights work alongside English administrators, German craftsmen collaborate with Spanish military engineers, and Italian scribes labour to copy and preserve documents from archives that span the breadth of European civilization. This cosmopolitan character reflects both the success of the evacuation efforts and the challenges facing the refugee community. Language barriers complicate communication and coordination. Different national traditions create tensions over proper procedures and protocols. Most fundamentally, men who had served the same order but in different kingdoms must now learn to work together under circumstances that none of them had ever anticipated or prepared for. Here you meet Sir William Sinclair of Roslin, the man who has emerged as the unofficial leader of the Scottish Templar community through a combination of practical ability, political connections, and sheer force of personality. The Sinclair family's long association with the Order provides him with legitimacy, but his leadership role has been earned through months of organising refugee operations and managing the complex political negotiations required to maintain Scottish royal protection. When you present your credentials and reveal the nature of your cargo, his reaction demonstrates the combination of strategic thinking and emotional control that has made him an effective leader during the crisis. He examines the documents you carry with the practiced eye of someone who understands not just their historical significance, but their potential political impact. His face grows increasingly grave as he reads, not because he is shocked by their contents. He clearly expected Templar archives to contain sensitive information, but because he recognizes the implications of their preservation for future operations. The secure chamber beneath the preceptory's round church, where Sir William leads you to examine and catalogue your cargo, reveals the true scope of the treasure preservation effort that has been undertaken by the Scottish refugee community. The chamber, carved from living rock and accessible only through hidden entrances, contains not just the materials you have brought, but accumulations from dozens of other successful evacuation missions. Chests of gold and silver from Templar commanderies across Britain and northern France line the walls, their contents carefully inventoried and recorded in ledgers that maintain the systematic approach to financial management that had always characterized Templar operations. Religious relics of immense value rest in specially constructed reliquaries. their authenticity verified through documentation that proves their provenance and spiritual significance. But the most remarkable collection consists of documents and books, thousands of scrolls and bound volumes that represent the accumulated knowledge and experience of 2 centuries of Templar achievement. These archives contain not just financial records and political correspondence, but technical manuals, linguistic dictionaries, geographical surveys, and scholarly treatises that encompass the full range of intellectual activity that had flourished in Templar scriptoriums throughout Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. The preservation of this intellectual treasure may prove more valuable in the long term than the preservation of material wealth, since it represents knowledge that could be lost forever if the persecution succeeds in completely eradicating Templar institutions. Mathematical techniques developed for calculating interest on international loans, engineering methods perfected during the construction of Crusader fortifications, linguistic skills acquired through decades of diplomacy. All of this expertise has been gathered here for safekeeping and potential future application. Sir William explains the strategic situation with the brutal clarity that characterises effective military leadership under desperate circumstances. King Robert the Bruce has indeed offered sanctuary to Templar refugees, and his protection has proven genuine and effective thus far. Several dozen knights have already joined Scottish forces, and their contributions to recent military victories have demonstrated the practical value of their service to Scottish independence. The Bruce's victory at Loudon Hill in May had been aided significantly by former Templars, who brought with them advanced knowledge of siege warfare, cavalry tactics, and battlefield coordination that Scottish forces had previously lacked. Their expertise in military engineering has improved Scottish fortifications and siege capabilities, while their experience in logistics and supply management has enhanced the effectiveness of Scottish military operations. But this protection cannot last forever, and Sir William's strategic assessment reveals the precarious nature of the sanctuary that Scotland provides. The kingdom remains at war with England, its resources are limited, and its political situation could change rapidly based on developments elsewhere in Europe. King Robert's excommunication means that his throne lacks papal legitimacy, making him vulnerable to challenges from within Scotland as well as pressure from external enemies. Moreover, the persecution of the Templars continues to evolve and intensify throughout Europe, suggesting that even Scotland may not remain immune to pressure from French and papal authorities. Reports from the continent indicate that Pope Clement, despite his obvious reluctance, is under increasing pressure to extend the persecution beyond its current scope and to demand more aggressive action from rulers who have thus far been lenient toward Templar refugees. Sir William leans close and speaks in strict confidence, revealing that the evacuation of the Templars from France was far more extensive than you had imagined. Ships sailed from La Rochelle, Bordeaux, and other ports, carrying not only treasure and the families of knights, but entire communities of their supporters. Some vessels indeed reached Portugal, Cyprus, Sicily, Sardinia, and even North African ports, where former Crusader connections offered opportunities for a fresh start. Yet the most intriguing reports speak of expeditions sailing to lands so distant and obscure that perhaps no European foot had ever set upon them. Sir William spreads before you a map unlike any you have seen before, drawn on vellum and marked with notations in several languages, showing not just the familiar coastlines of Europe, but routes extending far into the Atlantic Ocean. Islands are marked that do not appear on official charts, with notes indicating fresh water, timber resources, and indigenous populations whose reactions to European contact range from hostile to welcoming. Beyond these islands, sketchy outlines suggest landmasses that might be real geographical features or might represent the wishful thinking of navigators who have pushed beyond the boundaries of reliable knowledge. The Norse have long spoken of lands across the Western Ocean, Sir William continues, pointing to routes that extend beyond Iceland and Greenland toward destinations that exist only in the reports of the most daring explorers. Leif Erikson's Vinland, the forests and rivers that lie beyond the edge of Greenlandic ice. Our brothers have made contact with ship captains whose grandfathers sailed these waters, men who claim knowledge of routes to shores where no European king or pope has ever established authority. The possibility that Templar evacuation efforts might have reached such distant destinations opens up entirely new perspectives on the scope and ultimate success of the preservation mission. If some of your brothers have indeed established communities in lands beyond the reach of European political and religious authority, they would be free to develop Templar traditions and institutions without the constraints and compromises that characterise even the Scottish refugee communities. Over the following weeks, as winter deepens and snow begins to fall in the Scottish Highlands, you help coordinate what may be the final stages of this great exodus. Ships arrive regularly at Scottish ports, not just at the major harbours like Aberdeen and Dundee, but at tiny fishing villages and hidden coves known only to local smugglers. These vessels carry refugees, treasures, and increasingly desperate news from across Europe. The persecution has spread far beyond France. In Italy, Pope Clement has reluctantly ordered the arrest of Templars, though many Italian nobles are dragging their feet. In Spain, the response varies by kingdom. Castile and Aragon have seized Templar properties. Most disturbing of all, reports arrive from Cyprus that the remaining Templar strongholds in the eastern Mediterranean are under pressure from both the Hospitallers and local Muslim rulers. Your mission takes an unexpected turn when Sir William presents you with a choice that will define the rest of your life. Intelligence has arrived from these scattered refugee communities, carried by merchants and ship captains who maintain contact between the various sanctuaries. The reports paint a complex picture of survival, adaptation, and gradual integration into new societies. From Portugal comes news that former Templars are being welcomed into King Denice's service, their expertise in maritime logistics proving invaluable as Portuguese explorers push further down the African coast. The Order's advanced navigational knowledge, accumulated through 2 centuries of Mediterranean operations, has already contributed to expeditions that have mapped previously unknown stretches of the African coastline. More significantly, Portuguese authorities are discussing the formal reorganisation of Templar refugees into a new military order under royal rather than papal authority, an innovation that could serve as a model for other kingdoms. Sicilian reports describe a different form of integration. Former Templars have been absorbed into existing military orders or have found employment as military engineers and financial administrators in the service of local nobles. Their expertise in castle construction, siege warfare, and international banking has proven particularly valuable in Sicily's complex political environment, where competing claims to authority create constant demand for skilled administrators and military specialists. The most surprising intelligence comes from North Africa, where former Templars have established themselves as merchants and technical specialists in Muslim territories. Drawing on linguistic skills acquired during decades of diplomacy in the Crusader states, these refugees have found niches in trans-Saharan trade networks and urban craft production. Some reports suggest that former Templar physicians, trained in both European and Arab medical traditions, have gained particular respect in cities like Tunis and Fez. But all these reports also reveal the precarious nature of Templar survival outside Europe. In Portugal, despite royal protection, former brothers must constantly prove their value to maintain their positions. In Sicily, they remain vulnerable to political changes that could alter their status overnight. In North Africa, they exist as a tiny minority dependent on the tolerance of rulers who could withdraw protection at any moment. Sir William spreads before you letters and documents that reveal the scope of this dispersal. Maps mark the locations of Templar refugee communities, from Lisbon to Nicosia, from Palermo to Tunis. Each location presents different opportunities and challenges. but all share the common theme of adaptation and survival through practical contribution to their host societies. We must choose Guillaume, Sir William explains, with the gravity that has made him an effective leader during these desperate years. Scotland offers security, but it is the security of isolation. We can preserve Templar traditions here, but we remain dependent on Bruce's protection and cut off from the broader currents of European development. The refugee communities offer different possibilities: integration into evolving societies, opportunities to influence the future direction of Christian-Muslim relations, chances to contribute to maritime exploration that could reshape the known world. The choice before you crystallizes as you examine these reports. You could remain in Scotland, serving as keeper of Templar archives and traditions, documenting the stories of refugees and maintaining the institutional memory of a destroyed order. This would be valuable work ensuring that future generations understand what the Templars achieved and why they were destroyed. But it would also be fundamentally backward-looking, focused on preserving the past rather than shaping the future. Alternatively, you could join the refugee communities that are adapting to new circumstances in Portugal, Sicily, or even North Africa. Your skills in languages, diplomacy, and financial administration would be valuable in any of these locations. More importantly, you could contribute to the transformation of Templar expertise into new forms of service that transcend the religious and political boundaries that ultimately destroyed the original order. The Portuguese option proves most compelling. King Dinis has not merely offered sanctuary to Templar refugees, he has actively recruited them for his expanding maritime projects. Portuguese ships, guided by former Templar navigators and financed with methods developed in Templar banking houses, are pushing further into the Atlantic than any European vessels have ever travelled. They have established trading posts along the African coast and are exploring island chains that could serve as stepping stones to unknown destinations. The Portuguese understand what we learned in the Holy Land, explains Brother Marcus, a refugee from the Champagne Commandery who has served as liaison between Scotland and the Iberian communities. Military success depends on economic strength, and economic strength depends on geographical knowledge. They want our maps, our commercial contacts, our understanding of international finance. In return, they offer not just protection but partnership in enterprises that could fundamentally alter European civilization. This partnership extends beyond individual refugees to institutional innovation. The Portuguese are developing plans for a new military order that would combine Templar organisational methods with Portuguese royal authority, creating an institution that serves Christian purposes without subjecting itself to papal control. This Order of Christ, as preliminary documents describe it, would be dedicated to maritime exploration, the expansion of Christian influence in Africa, and the development of new territories beyond the traditional boundaries of European civilization. The implications are staggering. Rather than simply preserving Templar traditions in isolated communities, Portuguese integration could transform those traditions into the foundation for European expansion into previously unknown regions. The navigational skills developed for supplying crusader states could guide expeditions to circumnavigate Africa. The financial innovations created for managing international transactions could fund exploration on unprecedented scales. The diplomatic expertise acquired through centuries of negotiation with diverse cultures could facilitate peaceful contact with peoples beyond European experience. But the Portuguese option also involves risks that the Scottish sanctuary does not. Integration into Portuguese society means accepting Portuguese royal authority and abandoning hopes of eventual Templar restoration. It requires adapting sacred traditions to secular purposes and cooperating with political goals that may conflict with original Templar ideals. Most troublingly, it involves uncertainty about the ultimate direction of Portuguese expansion and the uses to which Templar expertise might be applied. After weeks of consideration, prayer and consultation with other refugees, you make the decision that will define your remaining years. The choice honours both your obligation to preserve Templar traditions and your commitment to serving purposes greater than institutional survival. You will divide your remaining years between Scotland and Portugal, spending winters in Balantrodoch, maintaining the archives and documenting refugee experiences, and summers in Lisbon, contributing to Portuguese maritime projects. This arrangement allows you to serve as a bridge between preservation and innovation, ensuring that Templar knowledge informs future expeditions while maintaining institutional memory for future generations. The archives you establish at Balantrodoch become a crucial repository of medieval knowledge. Working with other refugee scholars, you create comprehensive records of Templar agricultural innovations, military engineering techniques, financial practices, and diplomatic protocols. These documents preserve not just institutional history, but practical knowledge that could benefit European civilization for centuries to come. More importantly, you establish correspondence networks that maintain contact between scattered refugee communities. Letters flow regularly between Scotland, Portugal, Sicily, Cyprus, and even North African settlements, sharing information about local conditions, opportunities for cooperation, and developments that affect Templar survivors throughout the Mediterranean world. In Portugal, your contributions prove immediately valuable. The navigational charts and sailing directions, preserved in Templar archives, provide crucial information for expeditions exploring the African coast. Your experience in international finance helps Portuguese merchants establish trading relationships with North African partners. Your diplomatic skills, honed through decades of cross-cultural negotiation, facilitate peaceful contact with African rulers who control access to interior trade routes. But your most significant Portuguese contribution involves the development of institutional structures for the proposed Order of Christ. Drawing on 2 centuries of Templar organizational experience, you help design constitutions, training programs, and administrative procedures that could guide a new military order dedicated to exploration and expansion rather than Holy Land defense. This work requires careful adaptation of traditional forms to new purposes. The monastic discipline that served Templar knights in Jerusalem must be modified for sailors spending months at sea. The financial procedures developed for managing European estates must be adapted for funding expeditions to unknown destinations. The diplomatic protocols created for negotiating with Muslim rulers in Palestine must be expanded to address contact with African cultures that Europeans have never encountered. Years pass in this divided existence. The Great Persecution gradually burns itself out across Europe as King Philip's successors discover that destroying the Templars created more problems than it solved. Jacques de Molay and other leaders are burned at the stake in 1314, their deaths marking the official end of the Knights Templar as a unified institution. But the refugee communities continue to evolve, adapt, and contribute to their host societies in ways that preserve essential Templar values, while transcending the original order's limitations. Your correspondence with refugee communities reveals remarkable stories of adaptation and success. In Portugal, former Templars participate in expeditions that establish permanent European presence on Atlantic islands and African coastlines. In Sicily, they contribute to architectural projects that incorporate advanced engineering techniques developed in Crusader fortifications. In North Africa, they serve as cultural mediators, facilitating trade relationships that benefit both Christian and Muslim merchants. But the most significant development occurs in 1319, when Pope John XXII officially approves the creation of the Portuguese Order of Christ. This new institution, explicitly designed as a successor to the Templars, inherits many of their properties, adopts modified versions of their organizational structures, and commits itself to continuing their mission of Christian service through new methods appropriate to changed circumstances. You participate in the ceremonies marking the Order of Christ's foundation. Standing in the church at Toma, as former Templars take new vows that honour their original commitments while adapting them to Portuguese service. The moment represents not an ending, but a transformation, the survival of essential Templar values through institutional evolution that transcends the political conflicts that destroyed the original order. As you age and your active service gradually gives way to advisory roles and archival work, you begin composing the chronicle that will become your final contribution to Templar history. But this chronicle tells not a story of destruction and failure, but of adaptation and renewal. The Knights Templar did not disappear in 1314. They evolved into new forms that preserved their essential values while serving the changing needs of European civilization. The treasure of the Knights Templar, you conclude in your final entries, was never gold or silver, but institutional knowledge, the accumulated experience of 2 centuries of service in diverse cultural environments. This knowledge did not vanish with the Order's official dissolution, but found new expression in the Portuguese explorations, Sicilian engineering projects, and North African commercial enterprises that former Templars helped establish and guide. This treasure manifested in countless practical innovations that touched every aspect of medieval life. The agricultural techniques you witnessed transforming French countryside, 3-field rotation systems, advanced windmill designs, sophisticated drainage methods, now enriched Portuguese estates and Sicilian holdings. The engineering expertise that built Crusader fortifications found new purpose in Portuguese coastal defences and harbours designed to support Atlantic expeditions. The financial instruments that revolutionised European commerce, letters of credit, international banking networks, currency exchange protocols, provided the economic foundation for exploration ventures that extended Christian influence far beyond traditional boundaries. Perhaps most significantly, the diplomatic skills honed through centuries of negotiation with diverse cultures proved invaluable in establishing peaceful contact with African rulers and Muslim merchants. The linguistic expertise accumulated during Holy Land service, Arabic, Greek, various Crusader dialects, opened communication channels that purely military approaches could never achieve. The cross-cultural understanding developed through decades of managing relationships between Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities created frameworks for commercial cooperation that benefited all parties while advancing Christian interests through peaceful means rather than conquest. The medical knowledge preserved in Templar archives, synthesizing European treatments with techniques learned from Arab physicians during the Crusades, now saved Portuguese sailors from diseases that had previously decimated exploration crews. The navigational innovations developed for supplying distant Crusader outposts guided Portuguese vessels along African coastlines and into Atlantic waters where no European ships had ever ventured. The logistical systems created for managing complex international operations provided organizational models for expeditions spanning thousands of miles and lasting multiple years. It is here, in the monastery of Alcobaksha, in the year of our Lord 1330, that you set down these final words. Through the tall windows of the scriptorium, you can see Portuguese ships preparing for another expedition along the African coast, their sails bearing the distinctive red cross of the Order of Christ, your cross, transformed but not forgotten. The Atlantic wind carries the salt scent of adventure and discovery, mingling with the smoke from forges where former Templar craftsmen shape anchors and repair instruments that will guide these vessels to shores your forefathers never imagined. Your hands, now weathered by 6 decades of life and marked by countless hours of writing, tremble slightly as you dip your quill for this final entry. Around you, the shelves hold not just the chronicles you have written, but the rescued archives of a dozen Templar commanderies. Maps of Jerusalem's streets, accounts of grain shipments to Cyprus, treatises on Arabic medicine, and diplomatic correspondence with long-dead sultans. These documents, once scattered across burning France, now rest safely in Portuguese stone, their knowledge feeding new enterprises that extend Christian influence through exploration rather than conquest. Below in the harbour of nearby Porto, you can make out the masts of the latest expedition vessel, provisioned with supplies calculated using Templar logistical methods and navigated by charts that incorporate knowledge gained from 2 centuries of Mediterranean voyaging. Young Portuguese knights, wearing the habits of the Order of Christ, practice sword forms. Their instructors learned in the shadow of Jerusalem's walls. The circle closes, yet expands infinitely outward. Your final entry in the chronicle, written as the sun sets over waters that Portuguese expeditions push ever further into the unknown, captures the transformation you have witnessed. The Knights Templar died as a religious military order in 1314, but their mission continues in new forms that honour their original ideals while serving the expanding horizons of Christian civilization. We came to preserve the past, but we have helped create the future. The treasure we carried from burning France was not gold, but wisdom, and that wisdom now guides ships toward horizons that may hold wonders beyond our greatest dreams. May God grant that what we have learned through trial and adaptation will guide future generations toward greater wisdom and more effective service to His glory and the benefit of all mankind. Thank you for joining me in exploring the world of one of history's most secretive orders. Their true legacy lived not in the stones of their commanderies, but in the communities they built where different worlds could meet and create something entirely new. Until we meet again on another journey through history's forgotten paths, I wish you a peaceful night, free from the weight of ancient secrets and the burden of impossible choices that once haunted the Knights Templar during those desperate medieval days.